Hey, so in this month's November 2025 YouTube video and podcast episodes, it's going to be encompassing my interview with Ingrid Hu Dahl, who is really just an incredible woman. And I do have her website pulled up because I want to describe her book and a little bit about her. And she is not only such an articulate woman, but she's so present, and she just, I don't know, when I was sitting with her and talking with her, I just thought, oh my goodness, I was just trying to soak up everything about her because she just is fantastic. So I do want to introduce her book because I think after listening to this, you probably wanted to read, you would probably want to read her book. And it is tied very much into, of course, dying better. So her book is called Sun Shining Our Morning Snow. This is where I'm going to read from the website, so bear with me. It is a fearless and deeply moving memoir that celebrates the power of authenticity, love, and resilience. Ingrid, a mixed-race queer woman, takes readers on an intimate journey through the challenges of self-discovery, navigating the weight of social, cultural, and familial expectations. And it is so much more than that. So enjoy my talk with Ingrid. Whether you're on part one or part two, make sure to listen to both parts. And of course, I'm going to be linking her information in the information for both the YouTube video and podcast. Let me know if you have questions. I'll talk to you soon. Love you. Bye. The one thing I really, obviously on my channel, we talk a lot about dying and dying better. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to actually a group of people this past weekend, and they were dealing with some grief and stuff. And I think when I talk with people a lot, especially when this anticipatory grief comes up, there's so much fear about the anticipatory grief. So they might have been in the process of grieving, seeing the changes, not just the death of somebody that they love, but the changes of that person. So they're already grieving, but they are just really, really afraid of that grief period. So I wanted to ask you specifically, and we can go back and forth, but I was really curious, what did you discover through your grief process?
Yeah, I was wondering, do you mind if I read a little bit?
I would love for you to read. Yes.
Because I describe it.
Oh, perfect. Yay.
Okay.
Let's do that.
Yeah. So I won't jump in right away. I'll first say my grief process was writing this book.
Okay.
I was processing grief, writing this book. It was a channel, a creative outlet. It was this powerfully both sad and an uplifting decision to write my story and what I knew enough about my mom's to honor her.
Okay.
And to kind of heal some of the places in our past, in our journey, and to revisit the moments where we are actively healing generationally together, very organically, towards the dying phase of her life. And I also wanted people to understand the emotions that I was experiencing, not just with anticipatory grief, but also the fact that it was during COVID and I couldn't even see my dying parent until special entry visas opened up once a year. So in the last 2 years of my mother's, actively dying phases, I saw her twice.
There must have been so much going on there, but I know that I would imagine I would have been really pissed off. Were you angry amongst other things?
I think anger's all throughout it,
Always.
But it's just fear, anxiety, why is this so hard? Nobody totally is they're always following the rules, especially in Taiwan with COVID.
Okay.
This is what you have to follow. But when you're seeing a dying parent, no one totally understands what's the latest rules. So you can be in limbo a lot. And I think that feels this tension of anger and also oh my God, it might not work. I might not see my mom in the hospital. But let me read. There's these 2 meaty paragraphs in my book where I describe cancer.
Okay.
Okay. With cancer, it can feel like every step you take requires crossing a channel between two cities. Travel that was once direct and streamlined becomes complicated and puts you in a state of terror. Each step seems to take you farther away from your destination, even though you could have sworn you just saw the shore. With cancer, a multitude of barriers get in your path. Going from point A to B now includes a series of obstacles. Each data set, each CT scan result has you one moment riding a pendulum, the next in solitary confinement. It's as if you are living in a waking nightmare. You're on a roller coaster while also in a waiting room, and you're very much awake in an anxious state. You start forgetting that there was ever a channel to cross between two cities. You're so focused on making sense of where you are in a squiggly line of a surrealist painting that makes no sense unless you're the artist. Cancer is the artist holding the brush, the mad scientist at the helm, an unannounced roommate whom you can't confront, communicate, reason with, or inform that they have overstayed and were never welcomed. Cancer trespasses, harms, robs. It was a sociopath that Ma was forced to live with, that was encased in her body, and we stood outside trying to protect her without a blueprint to follow or a way to break her out.
I really love your writing.
Thank you.
You really, you just put the words together.
It makes the words the sense.
Oh my gosh. And I love how you described it. What was when, through all those, and this is a period of over how many years again with your mom's illness?
Yeah, her illness probably in total is about 7 years.
Okay.
I include like the very first endometrial cancer stage 1B. She had a hysterectomy and radiation, and it seemed like it was at bay for several years until it had metastasized into a really aggressive cancer in her lungs.
Okay.
It took them a while to even identify that the origin of it was endometrial cells.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was very intense.
I can only imagine. I mean, so many of these things are. What was one of the hardest things for you in this whole 7 years?
Perhaps one of the hardest things, besides all the things I just described
Right.
in the passage, and the fact that there was this like COVID barrier and an inability to see and visit my mom, was probably the cultural clash and it was hard to understand why the oncologist wasn't just telling me the truth of the prognosis. And it was really hard to sit with, well, culturally, you don't want to give a prognosis because you could will someone's death. It's a superstition, but it's also cultural.
Okay.
Also, in Taiwan, culturally, you don't fully cremate. So none of us were prepared where there's like these ceremonies where you're actually touching parts of her bones and her vertebra. And my father really wanted half of her remains to be in Taiwan and half to be back in New Jersey, where she spent 20 plus years of her life with us as a family. And I think the borderline maybe trauma of like having to hear bones tumbling into vessels, and like feel parts of what's remained. It's not ash. You think about
Right.
cremation, you're like ash, like totally palpable, but bone, vertebra, and them separating it to have half of her body remain in a urn in two different places was just like really surprising for my father and for us.
These parts, especially when we talk about, even after somebody dies and what happens, is something that I saw over and over how important it was to talk to the families beforehand, what it looks like. Obviously, different cultures have different ways of doing things. So it was a good for me personally, as a clinician and as a director with my staff, it was such a learning experience, and how we have to really ask people, not just what their type of cultures say about this, but just help to understand, and really getting my staff to talk about that. But also, how important it is to prepare the family when, say, the mortuary comes and walks in the door with a bag, what it looks like when it comes
100%.
out. And we had to, unfortunately, and this, I think this is what happens, is sometimes you learn things the hard way, but thankfully, at least you learn better, you do better. That's very interesting. I think we had a family with a similar situation, so it kind of reminds me of that. And in the midst of all this, when you're talking about, say, with the treatments and things, and not wanting to really state a prognosis, do you feel there was at one point where people, at least the physicians or the medical team, did they ever really have like a really honest discussion with you about what was happening with her, especially as she came closer to the end of her life, last 6 months, last year?
No, we were emailing the oncologist like as much as he would possibly respond, and he was a lovely, lovely oncologist, and you could tell he really cared about my mother, and was also kind of shocked that she was still alive in these moments. They're very subtle, but you could see it, a little nuances.
So he didn't say he was shocked, but you could tell that he was shocked.
Yeah, I think it was like always a surprise. My one interaction with the oncologist via email, because again, I'm mostly based in the States dealing with this, very far away with the pandemic to boot. When I finally am about to get my second special entry visa, which just opens up after she has this sort of life-threatening surgery. So the cancer had cut through her bronchial tissue and passageway and asphyxiates her. And she ends up getting the surgery to put a stent in her throat. I was able to get a response back from the oncologist, and this is perhaps the closest that was like, yeah, she's gonna die, like soon. I was like, hey, I'm waiting for this. Do I come now as she's like recovering from that surgery, or would it be better to like come when, maybe she's back home? And his response was, you should come now. And that was the only indication, like, okay, she's gonna die, and I might not even make it. I think what I ended up doing was taking on the role of the informer, the person who did the research, who would say like, okay, it looks like she's actively in part of the dying phase because she's hallucinating. Let's just engage with her. Let's connect with her. Let's keep her, to the best of our ability. But she was turning into a bit of a child. Like, she didn't understand why she couldn't leave. I'm like, you can barely stand on your own, Mom. You can't leave. So reasoning with a patient who's going through the cycle of death, I had to research it, and there really was no guidance. I had to bring the family together. I think it was interesting what you said about family, especially with the Asian culture. No one wanted to seem to admit that she was this sick, that they were about to lose their sister or their aunt. And when I told the family, it was in an email. It's like, hey, my mom is dying. You have a small window of time if you want to come visit her. So they were all like, oh, what? I'm so surprised. I'm like, I don't know why this is surprising, but okay. They all showed up in her apartment, came into her bedroom. I mean, she's got to be 85 pounds at this point. She's looking like she's the Walking Dead. She does all of this energy to connect with them and to kind of seem well enough, but also sort of saying a version of a goodbye, but not actually claiming it. And what was fascinating is it was as if they were just having a living room conversation. They went out to the physical living room, still sort of as if it was just like not a totally big deal, just different scene. And then I watched as my cousin, so this is his aunt, and he's like breaking down crying. He's the only one. And I think that also got me thinking that it's a generational thing because they left and that was the last time they saw their sister, or the aunt, their beloved aunt. And I thought that was pretty shocking because you picture people wanting to like be there and be
Right.
by, their side. And it was just honestly my father, who was an incredible caretaker to my mom, all throughout this journey. And then finally, when we could arrive, it was her kids, me and my brother.
Okay. Okay. What was it? Because I imagine it was some amount of time before you saw her in this condition. When you walked in and saw her, were you able to notice significant changes in her
Oh,
physically?
yeah. I write about it too. I don't have to
Yeah.
read it.
Yeah.
I can respond if
But
you would like.
yeah, because I just again in working, again 20 years with caregivers, that was one of the hardest things, I think, for many was, and it wasn't just the physical. The physical obviously has that immediate
Ooh.
hit, and I remember families members saying, I just felt it, right in their body. But then the other part was, you know, um, encountering the cognitive changes that can usually be, I think, a little bit concealed on a phone call, especially on like a short phone call or short interaction. So, for these people, again, what can you just kind of tell me what that experience was like for you, and then how did you kind of, I guess, deal with it, internally?
Yeah, when I finally saw my mom for the last stint of a visit, when I got out of quarantine hotel, I was going through my own sort of liberated experience where you sort of get this jolt of adrenaline or a jolt of like being free from like not a cage, but it can feel a little bit like a locked prison.
And
A
what, and
nice
that
one.
was and that was because that was for COVID, or was it something else?
Quarantine.
The quarantine.
Yeah.
I
So
can
in
imagine.
Taiwan, yeah, my first stint was 15 and a half days, and the second was 12 and a half. You don't see a human, like you're literally locked in a room. And I say that because it's an important context. You're finally in a cab where it's not wrapped in plastic and you can roll down the window, and you finally are out and you go back into another building, and it happens to be where, my parents live. I go up, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to go out and explore. But then you catch the sight of like the lime green tube for her oxygen tank. And you hear the sounds of it that are like relentless. They're like constantly
All the
trying to
time.
provide all the time. So the tube sort of like transitions my mind as I follow it to their bedroom and see her laying there, and she looks like she has died, and she's napping. And so going up to her, following all the way to her mouth and nose, and just seeing all of this factual, like she has been through so much from that, surviving that stint in her bronchial pathway. There's all these kind of like sort of like not burn marks, but there's all these like scabbing that's happening around her mouth.
Okay.
She's only getting pipetted water in her mouth at this moment.
Jeez.
So I gently go to hold her, and I feel that immediate, like, oh my God, she's like a fraction of the size that I last saw her a year ago. Like, she really, like, feeling like this tiny, 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 like a bird of a human. And I have to put that aside, like, mentally and say, okay, I'm going to have a freak out and cry, like, outside of this room later. But right
Okay.
now, I'm finally here. So holding her, I think what happens though, after and within and amongst those freak out moments, you're in like caretaking panic mode. So this is at the point where it's maintaining her level of comfort and pain. So regulating pain medication, fentanyl, morphine. It looks chaotic outside of her room. There's just like pills and schedules and trying to take notes and emailing, trying to do research. And then helping my mother pee was like the first time I'd ever had to do that.
That is a feat on its own. It's
It was. She had a commode,
yeah.
but that was like, I think what happens is you just go right into, at least for me, action mode, do
Okay.
mode, and it was how do I help my dad? So he and I became a team, like cooking, cleaning, like, wiping her down, doing all the things, and also trying to reason with her when she wanted to leave or talk about going back on treatment or having these hallucinations. By the time my brother was able to get out, because he had a lot of complications and his visa got lost, like it was crazy.
Oh, jeez.
When he finally arrived, though, he had a very different, like, that was not what his immediate reaction was to just go into do mode. We're, obviously, we're different people.
Right.
But his was to just be in the bed with my mom and kind of cuddle and coo her. And just, you could see his sort of shock and like the sadness and the overwhelming anticipatory grief meeting grief in its actualized form is beginning. That's its own shift, where you shift from anticipatory to like it's in the room. It's
Right.
in the room with
Right.
us. It's going to come into and take mom's spirit or whatever at any time. And watching that, my dad and I just instinctively kind of left them and closed the door and continued to do our doing, but we realized that it's going to be really hard for him. He doesn't, and it took him a while to learn, because I was eventually going to have to go because my mom actually shocked everybody. I think they thought, based on the signs, we had about a week or so.
Okay.
She lived for another month and a half, so it was quite drawn out, and fell and hit her head. And he had to go to the hospital. And my father was, exhausted and beyond wit's end and was trying to get help. So she eventually goes back into hospital, but is only there for maybe an hour or two and dies.
In the
And
hospital.
yeah, and it's fascinating. In some ways, I feel like my mother wanted to let her spirit go when we weren't physically there with her. And my father was turned away at the window and was listening to the laborious breath. There's that breathing that happens, which I now know of, but my father probably knows much more of because he was physically present for it. And he kind of experiences her death looking out the window and waits for the female physician to come in and says, "Could you please check my wife? I think she might have passed." She checks, she validates, yes, she's passed. And at that point, my father turns around and sees how my mother's skin has turned kind of an eerie gray.
Right.
And he's like, "I actually am so glad that you, my children, her children didn't have to experience that." But I write in the book that he had to experience that alone is really painful. But I understand. I think my mom wanted it just to be with him.
Okay. With you not being there, because this is a topic that comes up a lot, and it came up again this weekend. I'm still getting some messages about it because these people, just burdened with the terrible feeling of not being there for a loved one. And the pressure that they put on themselves to be there. And I would see this time and time again where families would hold a vigil by the bedside for days on end, weeks on end. And the second they would get up, the second they would go take a shower, their loved one would die. And, I have to give it credit to my staff because we put things in place to start to talk to them about, you may not be there at the time of your loved one's death. Let's explore why. I've come to my own conclusions on it because I have seen it so many times and I've heard it from my staff, especially with parents. I tend to say that, I think sometimes parents are parents till the very end. And while they love and remember all the times that you've been there, and this may be one time that this is something that they would do on their own or maybe would want to be with their spouse, How did you feel about not being there at the time? I mean, I'm guessing from what you were saying, you were really concerned about your dad having to do that alone.
Yeah, I think for listeners to give a different, well, to alleviate some of that pressure that listeners might be putting on themselves or witnessing people put on themselves, I I did not put that on myself. I had done what I needed to do. I had gone through such an ordeal to get to be with my mom, and it had time constraints. But when I was with her, there was like a few really, really touching moments that we shared, which I put in my book, where we kind of get to this like amazing transformation and generational healing. And we share, a bullying experience I had had. And it was the last time I really see my mom cry. And it's like so deeply powerful that she spent all this energy to cry, which is like, you don't have that kind of energy. But it was like on my behalf. And it got me thinking about what it would have been like if my mom was there to support me and to protect me. We talked about a shared well, like I was describing. Sometimes I go into this like really deep well if I perceive I'm being wronged or betrayed or not loved or hurt on purpose. And I'm describing like, yeah, it's like really deep and it's like always so overwhelming. And my mom, not really talking much at this point, saying like that well is mine. You inherited that from me. And just being able to talk with her about healing that for both of our sakes. And I had such deep meaning in the time I had with her. And my father was like, I couldn't have done this without you. Kind of gave me the strength I had to do things for me. And I also didn't necessarily want to be present for my mother's death. And I could tell she was sort of holding on. And I kept telling her, it's okay. It's okay to go. I was always saying, like, we love you and it's okay. We're going to be okay. We'll miss you terribly. It's going to be like horrible, but it's okay. Like, please feel free to let go. You don't have to fight for this. One of the things that she said that was really meaningful was, thank you for coming. Because before she had said, do not come. Don't bring the risk of COVID. Don't come, which was a real pang of rejection. But the fact that before I left, she said, thank you for coming, I'll hold that forever. The morning that I did leave, it was actually really poetic where I was going, but I left and she didn't really wake up.
Okay.
She was sleeping. And I remember just kind of giving her a kiss and whispering, how much I love her. And I said my goodbyes to her, and I knew she was a little like not always lucid, so I wasn't sure if she could hear me. But again, I had had these moments, and my brother stayed for another week or so because it'd been pretty drawn out. I think it was hard leaving my brother and my dad, but I actually went to a really poetic experience with my wife. So after my wife's father passed away, which was tragic, she was 21. She went to Italy to heal and to live. And we had planned this similar kind of experience, thinking that there was a different timeline. So I chose to move it out a bit and then chose the time that worked for me to have a similar kind of profound moment that connected me and my wife with grief, because she and I were going to be living through this next phase together. And, I think some people might be like, wow, that's really selfish. And, I grappled with that. I talked to my dad and brother, and we were like, going through it. And there's moments where I'm like, oh, maybe I should have stayed. But I think the way my mother potentially chose to pass, I think I did the right thing. And I don't think we should live with regret and guilt. And if you are there with your family member who's dying, if you can, you don't have to be there the whole time. You don't have to do all these things. It's the energy, the love and the memory that really matters, is what I learned. And in fact, now that my mother has passed, I've had all these incredible, like, entanglement, energetic experiences that still connect me with her spirit. Less so 3 years later, but enough so where I'm incredibly moved by how the physical and spiritual, like soul base, whatever dimension, and that
Yeah.
membrane that people cross in death has been amazing. So I've had like automatic writing experiences since
Oh,
since my
that's so
mom's
cool.
passing.
Oh.
It's so awesome. So actually, I'm thinking about writing a second book,
I
kind
was
of
gonna
about
say, I'm
that
sure the second
journey.
book is in you already, probably, right?
It is, yeah. A lot has happened since, yeah.
Oh my God, goodness. So one quick note, I must have not signed into the right my right account because it's showing me that the meeting is going to end in another 5 minutes. So we'll just let it end and then we'll come back on.
Okay.
Because it's I think I have my professional account for Zoom, but anyway, that's what it's there. What I wanted to ask you, I love everything that you shared, and I wrote several things down. Well, before I get into this, you mentioned her looking like a bird, and I, or
Feeling
feeling
like a
like a bird,
bird.
feeling like a
Yeah.
bird.
Like,
So that's mine own thing. I remember our nurses when we would be sitting around the table talking about our patients, we would
mm,
talk about how they almost look like a little bird and feel like this little bird in the bed, because they're so frail. They have so much wasting that, you go, how much more can you
yeah,
waste
it's
away?
amazing.
And it's just insane. And what's interesting too is even though they're so thin, they can linger on for a really long period of time. And this is where, what I wanted to ask you, and we can, again, it'll stop and then we'll maybe get into it more. But this is when we had to have those discussions like, so physically, this person should not be here anymore. So what is it they're holding it on to? Is it a spiritual existential distress? Is it maybe they need some forgiveness for something? And what I want to bring this up because I want to hear about why you think your mom was hanging on, if you have any idea or care to
Sure.
discuss, but also because there are things that, at least in the profession, for people in this state, that there are things that we can do, even though they can't, most often these patients in these states, they can't really communicate. There are ways that we can talk to them,
hmm
help them or at least verbalize that forgiveness is a possibility. I really thought you did such a beautiful job telling her that it was okay to go. And to hear that from your own daughter, your own child and your own
hmm
daughter, I mean that's I hope you know how special that is. I mean
I
that's
feel it.
it's
Thank you.
it's perfect. But what I was curious, and then of course for these other instances we would look at the history and things like that. But anyway, I'm just really curious about your mom and kind of what you thought was keeping her holding on.
Oh, it's really good. It's
Take your time.
fascinating. My mom is a complicated, powerful warrior spirit. We come from warrior spirit lineage, the female on the Chinese Asian side. And part of me feels like she's like fighting off death in some ways because she wants to live more. And no explaining gently to her that there is no more treatment like this. We are in hospice. We've signed papers. You have signed papers. I think she had such a strong will and a very strong spiritual belief. Her spiritual belief was in God and what I kind of call Sky Daddy. And I we don't share that,
That's
but
cool.
yeah, she I think it was a little heartbreaking. So two things about her religious faith. She on one hand really believed, and I put it in this book, my book, that God would come and save her. Like she really strongly believed that he would take time from his busy schedule and come down and save her from this like cancer killer. Like this cancer was like crazy. And the only reason why I think she had a little bit more life before this active dying period is because she was on this like immunotherapy, Keytruda, which just sort of helped slow down how fast things were happening.
Okay.
And it was incredibly expensive. And it was after she had done all the rounds of chemo. She had done so much. I don't know how much she wanted to do all that, but I think she felt like however she can help God help
Okay.
save her life.
Okay.
And maybe stick around. She had a lot of strong belief. Like she had a mind over matter belief that she could get better, and it was pretty powerful. I think what's a little heartbreaking is, my father kind of alluded to her having this moment while she's actively dying before she goes into this hospice hospital for like an hour or two and then dies. So this is probably like a few days before, where she's a bit struck with like, how could he have not come to save me? How could I actually be dying? And, my mom in those dying periods wasn't talking about death. She was talking about the future and wanting to like move back to the States. And you're like, it's so heartbreaking because that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But that was her belief.
Okay.
And so I actually put in the book that there's just this like incredible opportunity in that moment, I think, is my mother was about to experience some incredible things through death. And when we had some automatic writing, it almost was as if she was saying she believed in this like higher experience or spiritual or soul experience. And now that it was free, the limitation of believing it from a Christianity or in any kind of like human physical experience version was very limiting. And the travel that she was experiencing in time and like the waiting period was really beautiful. And she was by a lake and was describing this to me. I was like, whoa. And how we have such a limited understanding of time. It's very bendy and, undulates. And she'd always ask, like, what year is this for you? Trying to understand where I was.
Okay.
I know for some people that might sound like what, but I talked to a couple of professionals about it, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's automatic writing, entanglement, energetic, it's cool." I'm like, okay, but I think what's interesting is it's almost like the letting go of what you have believed for your entire life and what you have hoped, and letting go and saying, "It is what this is now, and I'm about to transition, and I'm letting go." Of all of that, not just of my body, but those beliefs, the disappointment, perhaps, the joys of having had a life and it's coming to the end and feeling all the emotions of it. But what's amazing is right after that and the waiting period, right, there is so much that potential person will experience, and I believe that this kind of positive energy, this love, this memory really helps support that soul in like where they go next, wherever that is.
Okay. Okay.
So I know that that was probably really hard for my mom, but I believe it was short lived.